Russell Wilson's mental coach, mental conditioning expert. Trevor Moawad, renowned mental conditioning expert, and has a book out that it's called It Takes What It Takes.
Neutral thinking is the belief that the past is real, but it's not predictive.
My passion and my mission to help you unleash your greatness within. My heart goes out to the underdogs that's on their way. If you think you can go from good to great, okay, let's motivate. GreatnessWithin.com. TJ Hoisington. GreatnessWithin.com.
As you asked about Trevor, I think that he's one of the best in the world to ever do it, in terms of mental coach and everything. He works with some of the best in the world, and I'm actually seeing him today. So I see him probably every week and talk to him all the time.
Trevor, welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast.
TJ, as another TJ, Trevor Jonathan, I'm excited to join, and obviously known you for a long time, watched your success, so excited to join. A cool time in my life, so happy to spend this time with you.
No, this is really cool. So one of the things that we like to do with all of our guests is have our guests do a little background review. Give us some of your story, if you would.
Yeah, so I currently live in Manhattan Beach, California, but I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, kind of the Lakewood, Tacoma area. It was weird because my father was a peak performance life coach, whatever the name of the industry is, whatever the certain title is, that's what my dad was. So full time, I was raised in the mid 70s, which was when he joined Lou Tice and they started working together, was right when I was born. And so I was raised kind of my whole life in the self-help industry. I went to college in LA, would ultimately go to Florida, and from being a high school teacher and a professional soccer player, I went from that world to being working as an educator at the IMG Sports Academy, but instead of teaching social sciences, I was teaching sports psychology. And principles that were very similar to what you and my dad and many of the other top leaders in the industry were teaching, but for a different audience, and did that for 12 years. And then came back out to the West Coast and ultimately made a decision to take this step on my own, and have been working largely in the sports world. Recently partnered with Seattle Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson on a corporate initiative called Limitless Minds, with a bigger goal to reach the educational community more in the school systems, and then a B2C element in the corporate community. And then I have a book coming out called It Takes What It Takes, which is a really cool opportunity through HarperCollins from the editor. Yes, from the editor that finished Shoe Dog, the Nike Phil Knight story. So I got really fortunate there. And so now really in the last 3 weeks, I've been kind of bouncing around New York and traveling to different places and doing different podcasts and talking to different people and sharing sort of some of the concepts that are that we think are unique to the market, and other ones that have been in the market for tens and tens of years that have been really successful, and just trying to really get the word out and demystify the industry. I think I think the things that are leading the self-help industry right now are the wrong things, and I hope that some of the ways we've had to adjust it to the sports world, because we don't have an active audience looking for help in sports, will make this less intimidating for people.
No, I love it. So let's go backwards just a little bit. I got so much to cover with you, and this is going to be so powerful for our listeners. But I feel like I should probably mention, for the listeners' sake.
Well, tell me about your population too, TJ. Obviously, I know you and my dad wrote that book before he passed, but you're largely, I know, one of the top guys in corporate America. Are you spending time on the West Coast, the Midwest,
all over,
Southeast,
internationally?
Huh?
I'm all over.
That's
over.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Oh, no, that's really nice of you, man. I want to bring up your dad for just a second.
Yeah.
He was literally an inspiration in my life. He helped me cement some thoughts, and you wrote about some of those thoughts in your book, but I love how, we'll go there in a second, I love how you kind of look at the world a little bit differently, but along the same lines. So
yes.
we will go into that. But with your dad, the audience may not know this, and I think it would be good for them to know, is that your dad, in about the year 2000, found out that he was, found out he had cancer. And a very rare form of it. And it was about that time I joined the organization, and I was working for him as a sales guy, if you will, and was just around him a lot. Well, after a few years, I thought, I don't just want to be the sales guy anymore, right? I want to be one of those experts in the industry. So I went out and I wrote my first book, and that took off, became a national bestseller. But your dad came to me one day because, as you know, although he found out in about the year 2000 that he had this rare disease, he was able to prolong that for many years. And It just so happened, he came to me one day and he says, TJ, there's one of my goals I've always had, and that is to write a book. And we've had 5 ghostwriters help me with the book several times. And every time I just put it away, didn't like it. He says, would you mind writing a book with me? I said, Bob, are you kidding me? I would be honored to write a book with you. So we decided we'd meet at your house, your parents' home. I've been there many times, right? We'd go to the house every Wednesday, and 2 weeks into beginning the process of writing the book is when, as you know, his lungs collapsed, and we didn't think he was going to make it. Right. And lo and behold, without going into the whole story here, people can watch the story on YouTube. I share it.
I've seen it. Yeah. I think you did a great job on YouTube.
So we'll leave that for a separate time. But lo and behold, when they were getting ready to pull the plug because he was on a respirator after several weeks in a coma, he started to breathe on his own. And it was at that point we continued to write a book called The Secret of the Slight Edge, where it was just awesome, because here's what happened. I think this is where you come in and where the law of reciprocity comes in. I was able to sit next to him while he laid on that bed the last 2 months, the last 2 months of his life, and he would talk about his kids, he would talk about his wife, he would talk about life, and then he would correct my language from time to time, because he would hear things that I couldn't hear, and then we would write this book, and it eventually came out. And when I was reading your book, It Takes What It Takes, I was just like, wow, the spirit of your dad is in here, but you definitely kind of set a new path for yourself. So I'm really curious to dive into your experience, your thoughts around these concepts, because in your book, you share a lot of actionable stories of working with these legendary athletes and so forth.
Yeah.
And so give me some of your nuggets that you've kind of discovered on your path.
Well, I think first of all, going back to my dad, I think when you think about this industry, which is, broadly helping people get to whatever their next level, if it's a school district, if it's an organization, if it's an individual, Bob Moawad, largely focused on organizations more so than individuals. I remember when the Sonics in the 80s came to him and said, "Hey, we want you to work with Tom Chambers and Xavier McDaniel." My dad, my dad's like, "I'll do the whole team, right? But I don't want to just do individuals." But what I remember vividly, so much of who my dad was the example that he lived, and so I think when you grow up in this industry and then you get a rare diagnosis of multiple myeloma like he got, and you're given this short window of time to live. I think what was really powerful for me is to see that everything that people in this space teach relative to how you think and how you design an ad campaign for yourself and how you minimize negativity and how you take this optimistic approach. He did all those things.
All the way to the end.
All the way to the end. And so when the time you're referring to, when he got Legionnaire's disease, and I think it's a good story for your audience. I mean, essentially, he had gone down to speak with the executives at Jack in the Box as part of a bigger package, and he caught, what happens when you're going through all sorts of different treatment and chemo and all those things. He caught Legionnaire's, which is, just like this aggressive pneumonia. And I was at the University of Michigan working with their soccer team, and he called me and said, "Hey, are you in a place where you can talk?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "They've told me I might just have a few days to live, and I've got this thing. My lungs are filling up quickly, and we're not sure how to stop this thing. And I want to see if you can come home." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, do you have any more presentations?" I'm like, "Well, I have one tonight." And he's like, "You need to do the one tonight." I was like, "Man, I don't know if I can do the one tonight, Dad. I need to come home." He said, "No, you owe it to the University of Michigan to do it." So, man, I knew a couple players I'd known on the team for a long time. I told them, they kind of got me through it. I flew out that night. I called my basketball coach, Michael Johnson, a handful of other people. I got home, and it had taken a real quick turn. And the next day, as you mentioned, he was in and out, but they said they were talking to myself. It was a weird audience because there were so many people, from the governor to his high school players of his to a janitor that worked at Clover Park High School. I mean, he had such a broad group that he impacted. But my brother and I went back there, and my mom had me go back with him, and they basically gave him a set of options where they said, there's really nothing we can do. We can sedate you and make it calm, and you'll pass away in the next 8 hours, or you can go under for the next couple days, and then we can see if we can reverse it, or if your position changes and you come out. And he said, "Look, I'm not a Vegas guy, but I'll take the odds of going under for a couple of days and seeing if I have a chance, rather than being sedated and passing away in 8 hours." So this was hard for my brother. So I went back with him, and then we did the last rites, and then they put him under. And so I left. I had to get back on the road and join. I was working, and he had his cell phone. And sure enough, 2 days later, I get a call. It's my dad's cell phone, and it's on Sunday. And I was like, "Hey, Mom?" And he's like, "No, it's your dad." I said, "What?" And then he said, "Yeah, I wanted to see if Tiger was going to win the Masters. I didn't want to keep sleeping." And he ended up living, for almost 5 months more, finishing the book, which he saw the manuscript or the final copy, or the galley, which was one of the last things he did, which was a really big deal to him. So I think our family's indebted to you for that. But I think it was just the incredible power of who he was, and the power of your mind, and the power of belief, and the power of betting on yourself, and all those things. So, that's the kind of example I was raised with. I was never told you need to go into this industry. You never do. You know, my dad was big.
I always wondered if you would actually. Because I would hear about you and I would hear all the great work you're doing at IMG and so forth. I'm like, dude, you're like destined for this industry, right?
Yeah, I was always doing it on the weekends and different things, but ultimately the sport world, to sort of navigate out of that, the sports world doesn't have a self-help industry. Mm-hmm. So, at IMG Academy, when you're paying $75,000 and you have kids and maybe soon, you're too young to have grandkids, but I know you got one married off there.
Oh yeah.
These athletes were at the 600-acre training center, which is like Hogwarts for athletes. Mm-hmm. And they were paying, $75,000 a year. So I was for many years the director of training. So we had to diversify the offerings to justify the expenses that were paid. So in addition to athletes training traditionally to get big, fast, and strong and play tennis, baseball, basketball, football, whatever the sport, we were able to build things in like mental conditioning and improv training and life skills and other elements that were unique parts of athletes that we believed we could train just to enhance the value proposition. I ran our mental conditioning program for a while, but we had access because IMG was the biggest sports agency in the world to the best athletes coming out there all the time to train. And because myself and my former business partners, the director of mental conditioning for the Yankees and the Cowboys, we were competent and we were athletic. At 24 years old, I started getting to train all the guys psychologically for the NFL draft, for Major League Baseball spring training, golf off season, tennis off season. So at 24, 25, I'm, getting access to Serena and to Venus and to Derek Jeter and to, 15 guys getting ready for this draft and Eli Manning and all those guys, not because I was, had earned it by any stretch, but I was there and there was really no curriculum to be taught. So we started figuring out, okay, there's a psychometric element. They need to get ready for these tests. And then this stuff that my dad taught, this, I want to integrate this. And then these case studies we got from Sports Century. And then we had so many athletes coming in, like Michael Johnson and the best athletes, we started videotaping and doing a series of asking them questions and then editing those. And then we had this library of hundreds of athletes talking about mindset and recovery and adversity and all those things. And so we had a really healthy industry within those walls, but the sports world largely, doesn't believe in helping athletes. I think at the professional level, we have an infinite supply of talent, TJ. So if you can't sustain the standard, we just get rid of you.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's what happens. So there's no 3-day offsite with TJ Hoisington, or we're not going through increasing human effectiveness.
Right.
No, we're just not doing that.
Okay, got it. So you say in the book here on this issue, you say the thing about, okay, so well, before I read this, explain neutral thinking.
Well, what I could see early on from a young age, and particularly myself, people have a really hard time being told to be positive and embracing the idea of being positive. In my experience, so many times I was with my dad, and people loved my dad, and he made a great living, and we lived in a beautiful home. But people gave him a lot of, shit for, hey, Mr. Positive, and hey, Mr. Positive. And he'd missed, 3 putts on a hole. And they say, where's your positive thinking now, Bob? And I noticed a lot of those things from 7, 8, 9 years old, even though it was so clearly the right way to do it and the right way to think and the right way to approach it. And there was an active audience that really engaged this, the power of positive thinking, obviously going back to my early years with Norman Vincent Peale and all the different authors that we were exposed to. And I started listening. My dad started playing those tapes for me at night from 4 years old on, all the Nightingale Conant tapes.
Here's one right here.
Yeah.
Your nature. I don't know if you can see this. Your
nature's greatest miracle. Yeah, they're awesome. I ordered all of them, and I listened to those in the Stinkin' Thinkin' song. Oh, yeah. And so I'm not talking about the audience that's hiring TJ Hoisington. I'm talking about everybody else that's not doing anything relative to self-help.
Right.
And so just those people that would see him. And so, and then I had a really tough time. As much as I could naturally, I was never cynical or negative, but positive thinking, being told to be positive, didn't resonate with me all the time. So as I would get into, okay, now you're 25 years old and you're hired by the Jacksonville Jaguars. And why are you hired? Well, you're hired because, they know you're down in Bradenton, Florida, and there isn't an active, they're not looking to the business world to hire people. And the market in the business world is so much more lucrative than in the sports world. Sports world has its cachet, but ultimately I would get my opportunity, and then I would realize that message of, there's a lot of messages that you teach that my dad would teach, but the message of being positive was not sinking, was not working. So I just couldn't do it. So then I started figuring out other things. I was teaching, behaviors, potential, self-talk. There's so many other principles that you could teach, and I was teaching them. But over a period of time, when I got to the University of Alabama, we had a minimal amount of time that we could kind of coach and teach the players psychologically relative to that architecture. Mm-hmm. And as I started to study, okay, how do we maximize our time? I realized that negative thinking was the real problem. And negative thinking, if we could just get rid of that, and without even an alternative, like that negative thinking, that from Harvard to Georgetown to all the studies, where it was a multiple of 4 to 7 times more powerful than positive thinking. It didn't mean that positive thinking didn't have power, but it only had power in the absence of negative, because the two narratives can't compete. I mean, think about our politics now. Think about the current president. That narrative is so negative because it works. So any message that's positive has no chance to compete against that narrative, because pointing out everything that's wrong is what wins. But it's how we're wired.
Yeah, it's funny how we're drawn to negativity in a lot of ways.
Right, and the book really goes in painstakingly to proving it, because I never felt like I had to prove neutral thinking or positive thinking. The only point I had to prove was that negative thinking will weaponize you against you, your organization against its organization, your family against your family, a brother against a sister, a community against a community, a culture against a culture. And then I started to really understand that the spoken word, which my dad had always taught me, that when you say something out loud is 10 times more powerful than when you think it. And so words were really powerful, but if I say it and it's 10 times and it's negative and it's 4 to 7 times, that means when I say negative things out loud, they're 40 to 70 times more powerful than if I just didn't say them. So as we advanced in our years at Alabama and Florida State and Georgia, our goal was how do we get our athletes to not say stupid things out loud? And if we could change that, if we could get them to stop saying stupid things out loud, weather, heat, don't like coaches, don't like teammate, game situation, circumstance, down and distance, if we could stop externalizing that, even if we weren't positive, we would be in a much better situation to find solutions.
So what would these athletes, and I actually really have a question about this, that where did the athletes, to just get rid of something, you found that you didn't, with these athletes, you didn't have to replace it with something else?
Correct. So what I did was I had all sorts of videos, data, articles, stories. When my dad passed away, I had over 1,500 articles and different things that were crazy stories about people, from Pistol Pete Maravich, saying, I don't want to die of a heart attack.
I have that. Yeah.
10 years of pro basketball, right? He's 26 years old. He plays 10 years. He dies at 40, which he predicts is exactly what would happen. And again, that's externalizing a negative statement. And there's so many more examples that we had. And then in video, Bill Buckner, the great baseball player, says, I don't want to give the game-winning run. I don't want to let the game-winning run score on a ground ball through my legs. And 10 days later, it's one of the biggest mistakes in the history of professional baseball. And so I would show all sorts of examples and data of how negative externalization negatively impacts you, and all the data around negativity. So there was no debate in that, but you can't show the same amount of data and information about positive thinking, at least in my experience from the sports world, that it's anecdotal. Like, all we know is negative thinking. My dad would always say, I don't know if positive thinking works all the time, but I know that negative thinking does.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And it works negatively. but he wasn't challenged to take that further. Well, if you have an audience that has no interest in listening to you, and as soon as you come there, right away, they've never even heard of anybody like you, and to the degree they have, it's been made fun of, or they kind of know Tony Robbins and it's all about making money, and I know that he's much more than that. Well, now you're entering an audience where you got to find a message that's going to work. And so early on, I had gone the positive route and failed. But fortunately, I was able to keep jobs and do different things because I had stakeholders at the right level, or I wasn't competing against anybody in the industry. So I think that's one of the things that's really, really powerful. So basically, I made a decision at that point that I want to teach, that all right, so I can prove negativity. And so basically we started focusing on this area of non-negativity, just eliminating negativity. Then we would focus on habits and behaviors and other elements.
What struggles would you find with these athletes though, where you as this expert is standing there saying, stop using negative phrases. Stop repeating negative things. We're just going to stop doing that. We're not going to say these things anymore. Did they internally, these athletes, just have to figure out areas, right? If their natural pattern is to go to that negative comment because they've said it for 18 years straight, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
What would they focus on that would draw them away from saying that anymore? I mean, just to stop saying it. Did you see, I guess I'm trying to see filling that gap somehow with something. Would they just put their focus more into their playbook? Would they go on the court and dribble longer? Would they?
No, it literally, my goal was to prove what we knew was true. And I was still going to respect their right to say stupid things out loud. But I wanted them to understand that as they said those things, it increased the probability by 40 to 70 times that what they were saying would happen.
So that awareness naturally would cause them to stop saying, like I was coaching an executive a few months ago. We're still coaching him today. And I kept hearing him say on these phone calls that I would have with him, the word hate. I hate this. I hate that. And I said, hey, let me pause you for a second. You say hate a lot.
Yeah.
And to that person, just to keep it general here, for that person, it was a breakthrough moment for them. They didn't even realize that they were using certain phrases over and over and over. And then I would show him on our phone calls where, well, you see how that ties over to here? You told me this story. And you see how that ties over to here? You told me about that experience. And see how it all works together? And that person today, if he was on this podcast show, would say, yeah, that was a game changer for me. Limiting that negative conversation and words that I was using. So
yeah. Well, I mean, for us, you can't be didactics. You have to present the information. You have to respect people's right not to use it.
Right.
And so that's really what we would do. But the way we built it at Alabama and those other places was with consistency. So I was around, every 2-3 weeks, and we would reinforce a message in different ways and different story. And it was one thing to think about. And then the other things we're studying great athletes, great behavior, great, elements, and we're focusing on other sides of, this industry. But the biggest thing we really focused on, to me, was if we could just change the language. And the first way to change it is just not to be how we were.
Right. But is it true? Correct me if I'm wrong. Call me out on this. Is by you showing them examples of other great athletes and what they did in this situation and how they responded. My thought is, from my research, is that as you're telling them not to do this over here, or that this is not useful, if you will.
Yeah.
But they had this as a vision to move toward. Right? I mean, that helped them. That helped bridge the change mentally for them, I would think.
Well, eventually, look, at the beginning, I didn't know what I was stumbling onto. All I was seeing was that the data around negativity was really, really bad. And that it was, if we could just be less that way, if we could complain less about the Heat, if we could complain less about the coaches. And so once our players understood that, they self-regulated each other. Hey man, that doesn't help. That's not how we talk here at Alabama. That's not how we do. And then, so So be mindful.
Attitudes are contagious.
Yes.
Right? You talk about that in the book. Attitudes are contagious.
Correct. And the right attitudes are contagious, and so are the wrong ones.
Right.
So I think the biggest thing, that we had to focus on was eventually by my third. So I taught it back then as the power of non-negativity, learning how to be less negative, and that ultimately that would be helpful. And we just never mentioned positive thinking, and we focused on other things. This is first you form habits, habits form you, and then we got behind other things, and then the other basic elements. But we really changed the language. And then by 2015, I was in my car once and I was looking at forward, reverse, and negative, forward, reverse, and neutral. And then I was thinking of the idea of how do you find a middle ground, where the problem I've always seen in positive thinking, in my opinion, is that it feels for many like it implies that an outcome that just happened, like a divorce, like a bad quarter, like something bad in a game, like a turnover, they're being told that it didn't happen and they need to quickly move on to the fact that whatever's next can be better. And it ties them to an outcome. Hey, we're still going to win the game, or hey, that's all right. Well, think about all the people you get to meet now that you're single. Well, I got married to not be single and to not meet people, so I'm not in that place. So this idea of but negative thinking is so powerful that if you're like, okay, this is bad and it happened, then the assumption, because it's so powerful, is if we talk about it and we naturally catastrophize, and it starts ruining our next series of moments. So there had to be a middle ground, because negative thinking, which has become identified with realism, isn't helpful. And it robs you of your next series of moments. Positive thinking is difficult because it's attached to an outcome that's so far from where you're at in that given moment if things aren't going well. So the idea of neutral was, I'm going to accept the fact that what happened happened. And I think people in the positive thinking movement really struggle with that, and really struggle with how to communicate that. No, my life, like I've heard it over and over again. No, I don't want to be told to be positive. My life sucks right now. Particularly when you're dealing with the population that I am, where 85% of your kids have no father in their life and 60% are below the poverty line. I'm not dealing with a CEO or a corporate executive or someone that you or Bill Campbell or somebody else. I'm not dealing with that population. Right. And I want to have a pervasive message. So ultimately, the negative thinking that it's not going to get their situation any better, but this idea of being neutral, where I can accept that it happened, but what happens next isn't connected to how I feel or what happened, but what I do. And there's no judgment that who I am going forward is going to define me based upon how I speak, and that there's a language behind neutral, which is behaviors, not outcomes, not winning, but how we win. And
how we adjust our behaviors,
we adjust our behavior. Then we put together videos of so many people who were process-oriented or task-oriented people that were really being neutral. And then, it had a little bit of Taoism but the Western Asian religions implied this lack of emotion or stoicism. And that's not what I'm talking about. You can be emotion and passionate, but you can be neutral because you're focusing on this is what we're going to do next, but you're not trying to pretend that you're not owning what happened.
I love it.
So that's how, we started teaching it. And then ultimately I started seeing it resonate for me. And then I, got challenged from Maria Shriver, the Kennedy, to leave the sports world and come out to a bigger audience. I didn't even have Instagram or social media, or hadn't, and ultimately we said, all right, we'll give it a shot. Russell Wilson and I did a TV show called Quarterback to Quarterback. HarperCollins saw it. They had just finished the book Shoe Dog. They'd approached me about doing a book, and they said, well, why don't you have one? I said, I haven't been allowed to have social media or do anything consumer facing, let alone a book. But I'm trying to do that now. It was in alignment with our current goals. So we'll see how the market takes it. I always laugh because I've been voted, sort of the best in the world at doing this in sports, which is I'm literally competing with like 4 people because nobody cares in sports. There's no industry. So, but as I look at it, I've been a lot of places and I've been pretty successful. But
you have been, yeah.
I think we'll have an opportunity in the business world as well in the educational space to move the needle. That's the goal.
I agree. One thing I love about your book, It Takes What It Takes, is, and I got to be careful that I'm not blinded by the concepts, because as you know, I'm familiar with these general concepts. But what I love about it is that you bring meat to the table, if I can use that terminology, right? You bring tangible, like you share a simple concept that your dad would share, I would share, you share, but then you wrap it in a specific experience with a player, possibly in many of the cases in here, that many people know.
Right. And or at a national championship or at a Rose Bowl where we're literally on the sideline and we are using that language and we're applying it and we're minimizing negativity. And that's what I think sports is a great metaphor for business.
Oh, it is. Yes.
And I think that's where hopefully this will resonate with some people. But it's really simple. And it's really simple because the audience I've dealt with has been really simple. And not simple-minded, but look, executive coaching is lucrative. It's a totally different industry in the sense that you have high-level people that either the organization is saying, we're making a commitment for you to help them, or they're making the commitment to get help.
Right.
Or a business or a corporation. Like, I can't emphasize enough that there are no coaches and nobody in sports doing any of that at all.
Unbelievable.
So they might speak broadly around language of focus and concentration and attitude and belief, but the general consensus is if we didn't recruit it, then we have to hope they change or get rid of them and get somebody new.
But you came in and you kind of created a name for yourself and help. You're kind of like I don't know, the guru, or I wrote down here, the Gandhi of mindset performance. You know?
In sports, I definitely built a place, like when I go in that world, people know me, they've heard of me, all that different thing. And they know but when I finish, when I open up that first team meeting or whatever, all I want to make sure is there's nobody that can debate it. Like, I didn't ask you to be positive, right? And then the other brand that's leading, and it's not that I don't believe in it, because positivity in the absence of negativity is really, really powerful. But people are trying to add it. It's like adding a bag of, an apple after you've ate 8 bags of Doritos. Just eat less Doritos. I love it. And I think the other thing that that's leading our industry right now is mindfulness and meditation. And I think those are really advanced skills that after you've learned the basic fundamentals of thinking about language and externalization and what you're processing and what you're watching, what you're consuming, yes, then having a Headspace app and meditating can be powerful, but not in advance of all these other skills. How this is leading our industry now, the secrets of mindfulness and all these things, I'm so embarrassed by being raised, because it should have a place in the same way that AP Physics has a place, but it should not be the front leading our brand.
That's right. The first principles are simple, and you bring them up here. What your dad would always say: words predict and perpetuate performance.
Performance, yep.
You say here in the book, and I love this. Oh, no. Yes, you said it in the book, but you also said it on a TV show that you were on. The past is real, but it's not predictive.
Correct.
I love that. Is succinct and it's real, man.
Right.
Oh.
And you learn that through sports, because how you play in the first half, man, it feels like that could happen the next half, but that next half has a history and a life of its own.
Yes.
And
Russell Wilson brings that out in the foreword of the book. Russell Wilson really brings that out. And somewhere in the book, either it was him or you, talked about they were down by 4 touchdowns at the half. And Russell Wilson's like, I start fresh every play.
Right. But he's not pretending that they're not down by 28 points.
Exactly.
And that's the problem, right? That's the problem with the reputation of our industry, which is you're trying to get people to lie. Like, hey man, I just went through this personal challenge. Hey, I know you did.
Okay.
You don't have to live in that personal challenge. If you do something different going forward, your life could be different.
Totally. Okay. So being very authentic here. I don't know if you knew that I worked with Tony Robbins in 1999. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that, no.
So when I came to your dad's company, it was in 2000 and 1999. I had left the Tony Robbins organization.
Okay.
And one thing, so two thoughts are going through my mind right now. One thing that Tony, which goes along this neutral thinking concept, Tony Robbins taught me, he says, see things as they are, but see them just a little bit better than they are. What most people do is they see things as they are and they see it worse than it is.
Right.
So here's what you're also saying on top of that, though, if I'm hearing you correctly, is sometimes people aren't seeing it as they should see it. They think it's all good, all good, all good. They're disassociated from the reality without making any strategic changes in their behavior.
Correct.
And so see things as they are. But what I guess when I was taking some notes before I actually read the book, and you covered it well in the book, was, are you saying get rid of positivity? And you obviously have said that, no, that's not what you're saying. But you said you can have a better impact by changing and eliminating the negative. And so I went to your dad one day, and your dad would have us write on cards mantras, basically. He'd call them affirmative reminders.
Affirmative reminders, first person, present tense. But I always thought they were behaviors and they were neutral statements that they had me do that I never believed that they were positive statements.
Okay.
So like when my dad had, I take setbacks as temporary and I bounce back quickly.
Yep.
That's not positive. That's a behavior. That's neutral. I take a setback as temporary and I bounce back quickly. This is how I deal with adversity. Now there'd be like, I radiate strength. And I mean, he had others that bordered on that boundary of things that people make fun of in the industry. But for the most part, it was his sister, your 5 values, the 5 most important things to you.
Correct.
And then it's the affirmative reminders, which I believe, and I go through visualization and imagery. I think all of those have power once you learn the basics. When a corporation or organization calls me, like, if they're not willing to invest in the first 4 hours for their senior leadership of learning the basics, there's no point. Like, I mean, I'll go do a keynote. I just did one yesterday and the day before, 600, 700 people, and introduce some of these things and whatever. But, if you're not doing simple better, if you're not getting these fundamentals down better, then it's like, what's the point? So my whole thing is, and I believe in mindfulness. I believe in meditation. I do yoga almost every day I can when the opportunity presents itself. And I think that state of shavasana is a powerful place. But that's the first thing we're teaching people. Like, hey, all your problems are solved by meditating.
So bullet point it for me. What would be the first things people need to do to get to that next level, that competitive edge? Boom, boom, boom.
Number one is be extremely aware of your external language and understand the power of it and the power of its predictive nature relative to if it's not good right now. Mm-hmm. I think probably the second thing would be aligning yourself with the behaviors that connect to the things that you currently want. So, so Russell Wilson, as an example, his behavior was so far ahead of his success that the behavior ultimately became predictive because of the way he lived. And Tiger Woods is a great example of having an incredible set of behaviors and then going away from them one at a time and then becoming nowhere near who he was because he didn't do what he did. Mm-hmm. So the changing in the doing and the behavior leads to the changing in the feelings and the emotion and the outcomes. And it takes time. So I think secondly, I think that's probably the second most thing. Am I living, do I understand what the people that I want? And also, TJ, it's okay to not want anything. Like average people become average through average behavior. And the world needs average people. Now, you and I don't spend a lot of time with those people, but we need average people. 79% of a curve in an academic class is going to be below a B-, right? So, but you're average based upon your language, based upon your behavior. And I don't think your thinking is your the externalization of your internal thoughts is where the power is. Eventually, once you say things right, and then you get alignment with the behaviors, I think the third thing is, what's my consumption? What do I watch? What do I listen to? What do I surround myself with? The recent statistics out of Gallup say 3 minutes of news, watching cable news in the morning increases my probability by 27%. I'll say I had a terrible day. In the special operations community, those military units are all top modern media. Who advertises to MSNBC? Who advertises to CNN? Who advertises to Fox? So you learn that that's their constituency, not you. And if you watch Fox or you watch CNN, it's entertainment. It should not be watched as facts. And so you learn, and then you also know that I'm not capable of watching that and being rational, so I'm not going to do that. So I would say probably one of the four things that I would say is, what you don't do right now probably will change your life way more so than what you do. And learning how to not say stupid things out loud, if people just did that right and were never positive, ever, but they minimized the statements of things that they didn't want to predict and perpetuate, it would change their life. How do I know that? It changed us at Florida State. It changed us at Georgia. And that wasn't anecdotal. That was in front of millions of people, and that led to national championships. That led to SEC championships, which are, it may not be a white paper good enough for Goldman Sachs, but it's good enough for the community I live in.
Love it. Well, that was great. You said in the book, language and behaviors have to line up with who we want to be, with the outcome you desire, period. And I think that's really powerful, because many people don't realize that our thoughts are things, right?
Right.
And I'm talking very actionable, not just mindfulness stuff. I'm talking about actionable things.
Of course.
If you're going to dwell, and your dad had a lot to do with this in my thinking, which was,
me too,
whatever you dwell on, you're going to attract more of that into your life.
Yeah.
And when I was reading Russell Wilson's foreword in the book,
it's good, huh? He's incredible. He could put you and I out of a job, TJ.
I know.
When it comes to teaching this stuff, it's incredible. My ghostwriter, after I interviewed him, he's like, he gave a better definition of neutral than you do. And I was
did
like,
he really? Oh, wow.
I mean, it's incredible. But no, go back. You're reading his forward.
Well, I was reading his forward, and it drew me back to my book, If You Think You Can. And I say this in the book, so I just want your take on it. I say, you can't stop yourself from thinking, nor can you always control what thoughts enter your mind, but you can control what you focus and dwell on. That little distinction of the word dwell came from your dad. But this is where I think you and I share a common similarity in our thinkings when it comes to what you're talking about. I write in the book, when a negative thought or pattern of thinking enters the mind, don't speak it. Find ways to distract yourself, forget it, or replace it with something better. When such a thought occurs to you, immediately stop yourself and say, erase or delete, or what I mean is, then begin focusing on something positive about, and I'm speaking generally to people, something positive that will, and what I'm really saying here is focus on something that's going to take you to a better place. Don't
something that's not negative. And so, like, listen, when you say positive, the way the educational framework was set up, there was only negative and positive. So like, if you're not saying negative, you have to say positive. That's my whole point. It never worked for me. And I think my dad wasn't the businessman that most people are. My dad, let's be honest, my dad was a bad businessman. And he just thought he was going to be teaching till he was 95 years old.
Yeah, or 100. Yeah, I get it.
And you know, I went and for people that follow your podcast, I'm sure they're probably aware of Lou Tice and you know, and Lou didn't really have a good succession plan either. But you know, I remember talking to Lou, and he just said, you know, Lou Tice, and I wanted to learn, I wanted to understand, like, what was really good about my dad in his life, and then where was he not so good. and then, you know, and how can I be better? And I didn't know what industry I wanted to go in, but I'm talking about just as a son, and you know that having your kids.
Oh yeah.
Because it was always a battle in our home about, like, why does my dad have all these business partners, and why does he divide all the money? Why does he have all these different types of things when this dude's on the plane doing all the speaking and all the different types of things? And I knew it was so much more than that ran a business. And I knew my dad didn't want to fool around with all that other stuff, which is why he didn't get a book done until you got it done, which was the right, you know, first person. But you guys really could have been writing his final fourth book.
Oh,
you know, based upon the amount of knowledge and the wealth he had and all the different types of things. And I've had the Miami Dolphins, all of our coaches, we bought The Secret of the Slight Edge. I mean, we've used the book for years.
Sure.
I think it's a really good framework I tell people, you want to understand how I'm raised, go read that book.
Yeah.
You know, I got chapters of it, you know, every night. But what Lou said was fascinating to me, and it sort of connects to what we're talking about. But he said, what your dad wanted was you know, he wanted to be able to have a second home, and he wanted to be able to vacation a couple times, and he wanted to teach till he was 95. And so he created a lifestyle based upon his behavior that would give him that. Mm-hmm. And Lou said, I wanted to fly my helicopter to work. I wanted to have my own plane. I wanted to take people to my own lodge. Your dad wasn't interested in any of that. He didn't want to do any of that. He didn't care. He didn't look at money in the same way. And so your dad's one of the best teachers for people. He said he's like a jazz singer who's not Harry Connick, but he's every bit as good as Harry Connick, and he plays in Metairie, Louisiana. And if you heard him, you would say, how come not more people haven't heard him?
Yeah.
Right. And he said, you know, and you said your dad, in the 80s, he wouldn't do infomercials. And that was Tony Robbins, and everybody was doing it. He thought it cheapened the business.
Yeah.
And that was how you marketed. That's the things he needed to do. The people that were going to take the next level. I mean, awaken the giant within. That was nothing back then. Right. You know, and the story was an interesting story of living in your car, but I mean, it wasn't, those stories don't train you as much to me as, you know, coaching for 18 years and teaching and being on the front lines and education and all the different places my dad had been. He was so much better prepared to be a leader of the industry. And he did at moments with John Stossel in the 2020 and the president of the National Association for Self-Esteem and other things. But ultimately, what I learned was, you know, our behavior confines us. And you know, my dad accepted the fact that he wasn't a great businessman, and he surrounded himself about people that he really liked, and they did a really good job. But he didn't grow necessarily the right ways. He didn't necessarily keep the TJ Hoisingtons when they were young and say, don't expand or expand within our walls.
Yeah, exactly. So
I learned a lot of those things early on, and then I also just learned things about his teaching that I just didn't agree with.
Well, there was one thing I had a hard time agreeing with, and I approached him on it one time, and I've never shared this before, is, you know how he would talk and have people write affirmative reminders. And when I read it in your book, but I love how in your book, it takes what it takes, is you make it more real. And it comes down to that neutral thinking. And this is the point. Is I would be teaching these classes for him as a facilitator, right? Mm-hmm. And we would have people write down these beliefs, these future beliefs that they would have, and one day they would achieve it. If they would just dwell on it long enough, they would eventually have it. And I believe in the principle of that. But what I felt weird about was when people would write down their future goals as though they already achieved it, I said, sometimes I feel like I'm cheating. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm fooling myself. And he goes, do I? So I asked him one day, I said, do I really have to write it down? And he said, no. And that surprised me because he said, I go, okay, we're on to something then. He says, you don't have to write it down if your mind, your own vision board, can create the picture of what you want going forward.
Right.
He says, but when people, and goes back to what you were saying earlier, start with the basics, right? And he says, when you're starting to take this information to people, we have them write those future mantras, those future affirmations, if you will, as a tool to give them direction for the mind. TJ, he said, you're probably capable, very capable of seeing an end picture and being able to drive toward it and making that end picture all the way through from beginning to end, make that picture vivid in your mind. Because as you probably remember, he would always say words trigger images, which trigger emotion.
Yes.
And if we're putting the right words and which are triggering the right images, it's going to produce the right emotions, which is going to allow us to perform at a higher level. My issue was I felt like people would sometimes, turn their eyes at me and roll their eyes and be like, well, we're really writing these things down. But in the truth, and I stand by it today, whatever you dwell on, whether you write it down or you think about it in your mind predominantly, you're going to attract and move in alignment and achieve in alignment with that dominant thought. Do you agree with that?
I do, and the affirmations, I actually, I modified them, a lot of them, because a lot of them were neutral statements and a lot of them were positive outcomes, and I just modified all the outcomes to neutral statements. But he did have some, like, I'm alive at 175 when the person might be 200. But I saw the value of stair stepping and creating that emotion of what it's going to feel like to be alive at 175. But I do believe in dwelling, and I do believe that whatever that words trigger pictures, which affect your emotional state. And when we dwell on things, ultimately we're moving towards that. But this is where I think it's different. The controllable dwelling. So what's the controllable dwelling? What I'm watching.
Yes.
Turn it off. What I'm listening to. Turn it off. So I talk about this in being married to a beautiful model that is stunning, and we had to move multiple times. So our whole idea of having a family got changed, and I was living on a plane 250 days a year, and we're trying to scale the business. But anyways, as I'm unwinding out of this situation, like if I listen to Sam Hunt, Jake Owen, new country, if I listen to country music, I was ruined. Like the same things my dad would say. So I couldn't. So just by not listening to Cop Car by Sam Hunt, I'm helping myself. Just by not watching that Meg Ryan movie, I'm helping myself. And I think the boxes that need to be checked before we advance to the next step are all those things.
Yeah.
What do you watch? Who do you? Well, hey, this is the only place I can eat. Go to another table at work. Don't sit with those. Geez, I was a high school teacher in LA Unified, which was a powerful experience for me. And there was a table where every teacher sat that didn't want to be there, right? Mm-hmm. They hated it. And I saw it early on. I'm like, man, I'm never going to sit there. 18 months into my job, TJ, I'm sitting at that table. I'm sitting there. And I said, this isn't meant for me. And I left. I finished the school year and I left that job. But ultimately, there are things that we can do within our work environment where we can control. But even if you couldn't control anything in your work environment, I'm talking about outside, the conversation you have as soon as you step out of work, mm-hmm. what you listen to when you get into your car. These are all the things, like in the years I could win with the athletes.
Yeah.
But they got that. It all made sense to them. It resonated, like what I'm saying and everything. And it was clear, and they wanted to win.
Yeah.
So I think, but I do believe, as somebody that's faced multiple health challenges in my life and has faced different types of things, that as you get those fundamentals down, which should be the introduction to self-help for all of us, and ultimately in the Renton School District, in the modern day school district, and all the different things, kids should learn these basics. Wellness in whatever the capacity is. And Russell and I believe this wholeheartedly. I know you do too, and I know many of us do. Then you start getting to, okay, well, what do I say? Okay, well, when you do speak the behaviors that you want to predict and perpetuate. Hey, how about we start competing? How about we start fighting? How about I start showing up early? How about I start? So I put all those together. So we hear Tom Brady, we hear Russell, we hear Kobe, we hear all those guys. And that's how they talk. Now, they don't know that they're being neutral. but they know they're not being negative, and they're really more focused on a behavior, not an outcome. So we start speaking that way. Then we start writing down like a marketing campaign. And the book, we go into designing an ad campaign, which is all from my dad, and then I focus more on Nike versus Reebok. And the neutral statement, just do it, right? Just do it doesn't imply an outcome. It applies just do something.
Yeah.
And just do a behavior. So you have to identify and write down the behavior. So I even put in the book, the University of Michigan, like how we came up with our team affirmation. We identified all the behaviors. So I believe in all those concepts once people have earned a right to get there. And I think where the industry has been unfair is like even that book that's out, like You Are a Bad, and I'm looking at all these things that I'm competing against right now, and I can't wait to pass them up on the list. And I start looking at this, and like I've earned, no matter what people say, like the academics are going to come at me, neutral thinking. They're like, I'm ready for it, and I get it, but nobody can debate that I've earned the right to have the opinion based upon 44 years of living and being raised in this environment and fighting it and being diagnosed with cancer and going through challenges and all the different types of things that I've faced. I have come to this through careful study, and this is what I believe, and I'm okay if people don't. And I believe that there's a third level of thinking, and it's neutral. I believe that with everything in my heart, and that's what I'm going to teach. And when I got to Georgia and I said, Kirby, I will leave Alabama and go to you at Georgia if you let me teach this. He says, I completely trust you. It makes sense to me. So all I did was teach neutral thinking. At Alabama, Florida State, I was still kind of non-negative, less negative is more power. I didn't know what it was really. I was just limiting the negative, but I knew I had to teach something, obviously, eventually. And then ultimately, so our affirmations become neutral. Our spoken word become neutral. Our language becomes neutral. And I think there's going to be a broad group of people that are going to accept that message and they're going to like it. And there's going to be a high level of people that are looking for self-actualization that are going to say, I need something more sophisticated. And I'm okay with that.
No, that's one thing your book really gives is practicality. It's very practical.
And we own it.
Correct, own it. And you're not saying and not suggesting that you shouldn't have big goals out there and shouldn't expect to get big results and you shouldn't have a vision. You should. What you're saying is the behaviors that will lead you there our language should match the behaviors we currently have and what behaviors we want to have.
Right.
Show up early.
I'm a big fan of the Jim Carrey $10 million check.
Oh yeah,
right?
Totally.
Totally. And I love the big thinking and our whole motto is think big, go far. But the behavior, like, just let's do simple better. That's the message, I think, and that's what I believe. And I look, and then I look at these other, I don't know what they're called, the new people like the Grant Cardones, the Gary Vaynerchuks, and all those. I don't know if they're thought leaders or whatever it is. And these are people that have made millions and millions of dollars, and now they're selling sort of the way they do it. But I also see like how like mean they are, like this is you should just get this, and to me this is complicated, and a lot of times we're not mindful of our language, and we need to start getting rid of the things that are so easily controlled. Like writing down goals is hard, it takes time. Writing down affirmations can be hard, takes time. Writing down a daily plan. I did Tom Bilyeu's podcast. I'm listening to the executive coach that was on me before, and he's talking about laying in his bed and doing the self-actualization 20 minutes every morning and all these different things. I'm like, man, I could never do that. Use my language. Like in my bed for 20 minutes, like writing down my goals, like I've never, and I've been raised my whole life in this. And when I'm leaving church, like I'm in a meditative state. When I end yoga, I'm in one for like 8 minutes. and I've been around all these guys at the Super Bowls or before US Open or before National Championship, and that's not what we're doing. Now, eventually though, so we will do progressive muscle relaxation. We will visualize field goals like driving through, because like my dad would say in cybernetics, like a vividly imagined experience is the equivalent of a real experience. So I think it's all there. And I have affirmations. I still do affirmations based upon this type of business that I want to grow. I have through 44 years is achievement. I don't have, which people might think is a lot, but I don't, I haven't saved enough money, or I haven't built a brand. I haven't built a legacy. I haven't built a lot of different types of things. I've been a lot of really cool places. Mm-hmm. I've been really successful relative to how you could view somebody going into a field where there isn't a field. Like in sports, what I've done for sports and mental conditioning and sports psychology is as much as anybody's ever done for it in the industry. The articles and the stories and the relevance that I've been able to build. I also am very humble, because I know that I'm not competing against, like I tell people, there isn't a Tony Robbins. And if there was, I'd be the closest to it. And Tony can stand on his wallet and talk to the gods and sniff clouds. I stand on my wallet and I'm looking at my door, and it's just a totally different industry. With sports world says, you're lucky that we brought you here. Business world, you say, you pay X or I'm not coming. We'll pay X. Now I'm learning all this. I'm sitting there. I was talking to my former spouse, and she's like, you're charging what for these events? Because now I see what the marketplace is. But the marketplace I've been in, I'm not competing against anything because they've never done it before. No one's spending money on people coming in for 25 days. No, I wasn't hurting. I'm at the very top end of that market, but I'll tell you what, it's nowhere near your market.
Wow.
And I've in terms of, and now I'm learning it in business where I'm like, they're going to spend that, and then well, based upon you here, and I'm like, wow.
Well, and the beautiful thing, whether it's you or whether it's me, is because we can go into those groups, those teams, those organizations, and we can help them get results
and get it done.
And get it done. Let's just get to work. Let's not dream about it.
Right.
Let's go to work. Here are some tools along the way that you can apply. Right. To your behavior, to your actions that will help you go to the next level. And I love you have really laid that out in the book.
I'm proud of that. I was definitely proud of that. That at the end of the day, however it sells, however it does, it's accurate to what I believe.
Totally. And that's what I felt with If You Think You Can. I felt like I came out of the Tony Robbins organization. And when I first left him and I was speaking, and I was even at Edge Learning Institute, I would speak, and I would kind of speak like I was a mini Tony Robbins.
Right.
And I got to a point one day, awareness, TJ, you're not being yourself.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I lost everything, including my office at Edge Learning Institute, that I couldn't pay for that office anymore. I left the company, and I had a car repossessed. And in my darkest moment in 2004, I write this manuscript that I hope sells. And my wife is telling me I should go get a job. And I was like, just let me do this one last thing, honey. And she says, okay, I'll let you, but if it doesn't work, you got to go get a job. And that was the last thing I wanted to do, because my vision ever since I was a kid was to do what Bob Moawad is doing. My kid was to do what Jim Rohn is doing. Right? So I was like, I can't. And then that book within 2 months became a national bestseller after writing it in the back seat of my car, because if I was willing to take the action that could make the book come true, the fuel that would give me the motivation to write every day in the backseat of my car was based on the vision I had of the future opportunities that book would give me. And to think that—
That's awesome.
I just think, don't give up on your dreams, go after it, but you cannot sit and wait for the door to open for you. You got to go create your opportunities.
Yeah. And then there's a lot of things you had to stop doing or things that might have gotten your way that, that were going to make that happen. And I think that, I remember reading, my dad gave me, and was there another guy named Keith Harrell, maybe? Keith
Harrell, attitude is everything, which is your dad's coined phrase, by the way.
Right.
And Keith Harrell passed, just so you know, Keith Harrell endorsed If You Think You Can as well. But Keith Harrell passed away. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that, but I know that my dad gave me your book eventually, and Keith's. And, you know, he was always a champion. He loved, you know, people that he'd been connected to were successful, you know, and I think he was always very successful relative to that's what Lou Tice helped me understand what his definition of success was for himself and his family. I think there were people that said, you should be Tony Robbins. And that was never what he really wanted to do. And I think he was really happy. And I think that was where we just weren't prepared for the illness to hit, and then the cost associated, all those things. But ultimately, my mom's doing fine. My brother's fine. He's got, you know, 2 great kids that are college. You know, one's in college and the other one's
awesome.
On their way there. So, you know everything works out.
Let me say, I got a couple quick questions for you here on this interview. First of all, your dad, and I want to say this humbly and with total gratitude, was a great example for me. When I learned, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, when he took a sabbatical when you were at Charles Wright, he took a sabbatical to help lead your was it the basketball team?
Basketball team, 5 months.
He took 5 months, and once I heard that story, and my kids got a little bit older, and I showed up at Vashon High School to watch my son as a 7th grader practice with the high schoolers because they didn't have a middle school coach. And 3 days after sitting there with my lawn chair watching practice go, the head coach comes up to me and says, hey, Mr. Hoisington, would you like to be the middle school coach? They need a coach over there. I freaked out inside because I was out of my comfort zone. I thought, what do I remember about football? I played a few years, but come on, right? And I ended up, because of your dad, I took a 3-year sabbatical during the few months a year that they would play football. And I was my son's football coach for 3 years. Yeah. And you know what? I don't believe I gave those players any skills other than how to think.
Yep.
That was all I gave it. And if you know what, in the end, and you make the point in the book, you could, and correct me, step in here, but you say in the book, you could have 2 people that have very similar levels of talent. Right. The one that's going to have the competitive edge is the one that's going to adopt these principles in this book.
Agreed. And Russell's agent just did this as well. And I think one of the reasons I was able to manage and handle, you know, my dad's illness and his passing in such a way was because he took that time. You know, he worked it out with this company, and he basically, you know, because he was a state championship head coach, and he said, I'm going to be at, you know, 90% of the practices, all of the games. And then, you know, he was going to travel where and when he could. But for the most part, we got to drive to and from practice. We got to break down the film together. You know, I was the standout point guard on the team, and my best friends who had been raised in our household, you know, and it wasn't time, you know, we you know, I drove him crazy from time to time, and likewise, but and we ended up a game short of state, but at one point we were ranked like 7th in the state, and he just gave us structure and he gave us education, and we did the Unlocking Your Potential course. We did that in the summer, but without a facilitator because he was teaching it. All those years with my college soccer and college basketball teams, you know, I played both at Occidental. Those coaches who are still there still remember him coming in, teaching them free throws, doing different things. And this is before we're playing the University of San Diego or other elements. He just, you know, what was probably the most humbling for me about my dad's passing was that the service at the country club, after the funeral, there were 1,200 people there. They said it was the most that they'd had for an event like that. And just how many people were students of his, high school students, were janitors. His very last presentation he ever did, I took my wife to at the time, and it was for her to understand a little bit more about where I come from.
Oh yeah.
And he's right in the middle of you know, God knows how many rounds of chemo, and he's, you know, in this stretch. This is probably a month before he ends up getting the Legionnaires. We had to pull over multiple times so he could vomit. He gets there. We're doing the Washington Association of Custodial Workers, like at a gym. You're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, and this is my dad, like at a gym, and he walks in and he's kind of, and there's 600 people sitting in a gym that are all janitors and custodial workers, and he's doing a keynote to them in a gym for 90 minutes, right?
Oh yeah.
And he has a piano and a ukulele and a mic. And everybody's kind of coming in like, man, what are we doing? Blah, 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 this and that, and his hair had come back, but he'd taken such a beating physically through, because my dad did not want remission. It was cure. Everything was cure. So
it was. He always spoke that way. Yeah.
That was it. Like it was cure. So, and maybe in some ways it would have been better to just get it going remission for 3 years and then adapt, and then without being so aggressive, but you never know. There's no win or lose. But ultimately, he does his thing, and by the end, he connects every one of those employees to how they change the lives for these students at these schools, and how what they do and how important they are and how valued they are, and people are emotional. And there's a line of hundreds of people waiting to have him sign your book, and he's got your book and
The Secret of the Slight Edge. The Secret of the Slight Edge. Yeah.
And and I look over at my wife, and she's crying. And she's just like, how do you, and it's emotional even talking about like who has the skill to do what he just did? And who has the skill to make people feel better? What an incredible gift, and that is what he had.
It's true.
And I remember talking to Serna Williams once about, she comes back to see Nick Bollettieri, and Nick's 88 years old now. And he's a famous tennis guru.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm talking to her, and it's Bradenton, Florida. It's the middle of nowhere. She's been number one for 12 years at this point. And I would always meet with her when she came in. And I was like, why do you come back to Bradenton, Florida? I mean, and all these years later, Serena, and she's just like, Nick just has an incredible way of making me feel good about who I am. And you start to think about like, that message matters too. People that can do that. So I've never lost sight of the fact that part of this job is not only to teach information and the basic information, but to help people believe that they can change. And so part of the reason I get so passionate when companies feel like they have to have somebody that has 8 degrees from Harvard or 19 neuroscience degrees or some really complicated message, I don't think that's what those employees are looking for. They're looking for something that's actionable that they can walk out with and
touch the heart,
change their lives and make them better. And that's the best feedback that I ever get, is that wasn't complicated, and I tell them, I'm like, I got a double-digit IQ. There's no shot it's going to be complicated, and but I didn't get that to the degree that my dad got that.
Well, let me tell you a story that
gift.
I've never shared. I'm sure you don't know about the story. Is I'm sitting in the office one day and I see him walking down the hall, and he sort of had this aura about him, which was really special. You just didn't go up and talk to him in terms of, he was a focused guy. He was all about this practicality that you bring to the table. I feel like he was very practical too.
Very much so.
And so I always felt a little bit overwhelmed by him. But one day I went up to him. I said, hey, Bob, this is during his sickness, probably 2002-ish.
Yeah.
I said, Bob, I'm just wondering, you know what I'd love to do? I'd love to interview you. I've got a computer and a couple microphones at home. How about I interview you and we could, this is before podcasts were even out there, right? It was just an idea I had. It would be great to capture him because we didn't know how long he was going to live. So he goes, absolutely. Why don't we do it? And it was next Tuesday at 4:00. Is that good for you? I said, yeah, that's perfect for me. I'll come in, set up beforehand. You can come in and we'll start this interview. I have my computer there on the table. On one side of the table is a microphone. On my side, there's a microphone. And I got everything set up. I go to his office. I say, okay, we're ready, Bob. And he comes in and I say, Bob, how are you doing? Let's talk. And we started to talk and we got into about 40 minutes of our conversation. And I looked down at my computer and realized I didn't hit the record button.
Oh.
Inside, I was so devastated. I'm sure I turned beet red. I didn't tell him about it because I was embarrassed about it, because I wasted his time, if you will. And so I ignored it. I put everything away. He said, thank you, all that. But for the next 3 days, my guilt was just like, I've got to fess up. I've got to tell Bob, and I think it was 4 days later, I saw him in the hallway. He says, hey, TJ, how's the interview? How'd it turn out? And I said, Bob, I owe you a huge apology. I said, I realized halfway through the interview that I never hit the record button, so it didn't actually work out. And I was ready, in a sense, I was ready for him to go, what? How could you waste my time like that? He didn't do that. What he said was, he says, TJ, and I remember he patted me on the shoulder. He says, TJ, that's not like you to do something like that. Mm-hmm. And then he said, we'll have a chance to do it in the future again. And I said, oh, I felt so humbled by that, to think that 3 years later, or whatever the date was, I was writing the book with him, and then to think 13 years later, I've got his son on my Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. I just think, what a beautiful, what a pleasure it is to have you on the show, man.
No, it's awesome. It's a pleasure, and I'm glad. And because you said that, that's probably why he asked you to write the book. And because you had the experience of sitting down one-on-one, and he did have a way of affirming when you would make a mistake. That surprised me. It's not like, that's not who you are. It's all right. And you're going to be different going forward. Yeah. And I think that's part of parenting. I think that's part of educating. I think that's part of teaching. I think that's part of leadership. And I think there's so many different ways to look at this industry. I was watching something with Simon Sinek recently. I like the way he does things. Obviously I've read both your books, and then I've seen the success that you've had. And there have been a handful of people out of my dad, certainly out of Lou's organization, that have gone on to be really successful. I just think the world needs more and more people that are willing to help and to inspire and to get us to feel, I've never seen our country in a time like we have right now. And I don't pay attention to Twitter, and I don't pay attention to certain elements and certain things, but my dad would always say, make hope a habit. And we need, and that when you become helpless, you become hopeless. And when you become helpful, you become hopeful. And I definitely agree with that when we can help ourselves, then that hope becomes really transparent. And then when we don't feel like we can help ourselves, we don't have the skills. Like, there are people that work in businesses that feel like they're stuck. There are people that are in marriages that feel like they're stuck. There are kids that are, raised in families that feel like they can't compete with their older siblings' successes. And all they need is some basic fundamentals that you're teaching, that I'm teaching, that Tony's teaching, that Simon Sinek's teaching, that all these different people. So my whole goal with It Takes What It Takes was, I want to have an introduction for people that don't naturally buy a book like this. And I want to have, I want this to be a public golf course that's $8. Still got to go to the golf course, still got to pay $8, but this is not Augusta National. This is easy but you got to be willing to engage.
But don't underplay it, man. What I mean is the concepts in here are tested and true.
They are tested and true. There's no doubt, but they're not complicated. I guess that's my point.
They're not complicated. No, they're simple things. And if someone will read your book, if someone will take this book, invest a little bit of their money and their time, they will walk away a better person. I know that. And what I love about this book and the way that you've structured it is all the real tactical experiences, one-on-ones, group settings with teams at these championships or leading to championships, or with Russell Wilson, and you weave that stuff through. So listen, if you're just a person who loves and wants to grow, get the book. But if you're a person who loves sports, let me tell you, you got so many cool stories in here. I'm just blown away.
It's crazy because I was never a sports fan, as big as an athlete as I am. And even now I watch HGTV and people think it's amazing. But I started after, I think, my third national championship, because I'm right out there. My job is to take the concepts I'm teaching all year in those games. So I'm focusing on trigger words. I'm focusing on key simple language. I'm focusing on behaviors. So I'm right in the middle doing all that stuff during the games. And I,
so what do you, yeah.
And so I realize a lot of these national championships, I'm so focused, I'm not enjoying it. So, and my third one at the Rose Bowl, I'm literally 3 miles away from Occidental College, where I was a Division III athlete and a struggling student. So I'm at this moment 3 years ago, it's 3rd down and 2. I'm on my knee between our head coach, Kirby Smart, and our defensive coordinator, Mel Tucker. We've just tied the game. Baker Mayfield has the ball. We have.
Oh yeah, you said we. Wait, you said.
Yeah.
We have the ball.
Yeah. I'm on my knee. I'm between Kirby Smart and the head coach of Georgia and Mel Tucker, our defensive coordinator. And I'm in this massive moment, and it's like time stopped. And I just was like, how did some kid from Tacoma, Washington, I've got a master's degree in education or whatever, but how did I get here? And I literally it was like time stopped for a moment to really enjoy. As I look in, you got 103,000 people, and you're in this biggest moment, but I realized I earned the right to be there, and there's a reason I'm standing in that moment. And everybody in business, everyone you're coaching, everyone you're talking to understands the idea of a unique value proposition. You have to prove yourself an asset. And eventually I learned how to do that in these programs, to figure out how, if he's with us, it's helpful. And we need him as a huge resource. And we're going to have to spend and invest. And in many cases, I'm making more than full-time employees, even though it's still a lot less than our industry pays, which I've had to explain to people many a time. But it's been a fun journey, and it's just awesome to see. I remember I gave all our players mirrors one national championship and had them grab them. When I was doing my talk a couple of days before, they didn't know I put them below our chairs, and I just said, I want you to hold that person accountable. That person right there. Forget about everything else. I understand you have roles, you got teammates. Based upon the way this roster is constructed, if who you're looking at right now performs, we win. And all game during the national championship, I have a mirror in my hand, and I'm going up and I'm showing our players, look in the mirror, and they're all nodding and they get it. We score the touchdown to seal it, and I go to our running back and I do it, and it's on CBS. They have it. Nobody's got any idea why that dude's holding up a mirror, but you just see how once you can build stickiness in an organization, you have the flexibility where people like Nick Saban or Kirby Smart or Jimbo Fisher, they're going to let me do those ideas. I want to give everybody a mirror, or stop asking. For the most part, anything I think we should do, we do. And that's where I think that was a lot of fun. But now, after 18 years in that world, I'm excited to go to a bigger world.
You're gonna do awesome in the bigger world, in a different, not bigger, just different world.
Just different.
So are you? So when you're in the middle of a game, and maybe the team isn't doing great, in the past, were you on the sidelines doing little coaching sessions with the players?
Yes.
So
yeah,
get down to the nitty gritty. Get down to the nitty gritty with me in terms of something actionable you would do in the moment of game. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah. So my first experience, my first 4 years, we would just go and help on Wednesdays. And then when I got the opportunity with the Miami Dolphins, Coach Saban put in a series of games. He wanted me at games as well. I'd never been at games before, and really not a lot of people from our industry had. So I was just trying to figure out, what am I going to do? But I'd been around the guys a lot. I'd done a lot of different things. And a lot of it was because we started the season 1-6, and coaches they just need to hear another voice and they respect you. And I'm like Jason Taylor and Zach Thomas and all these dudes. So at the beginning, I had to figure out locker room. I start walking, I'm talking, and then Zach Thomas is like, hey man, I'm kind of in my zone, getting ready for the game. So you learn okay, you got to be careful in the locker room before a game. You have to be strategic of how you're going to do things. So what I learned was the key guys that I engage with individually, I'm going to put together an individual video for them. I had a DVD player, and I'd set it up in their lockers. They could watch it before the game. And then I also made these educational videos when before our coach would do his discussion with the team. We would the coaches and I work on all our themes together. So for 15 years, I've been working with coaches on their pregame speeches, their talks, all the things. I ended up, learning how to, that's what they needed. And they said, well, your dad did Chicken Soup for the Soul, so I figured you must be good at this. And that meant nothing, that my dad. So I learned how to be good at it to help them with their talk. So we watch a video for the whole team. And then during the game, we're down or we're struggling, or we're winning. It's emotional intelligence. So it's in a moment like that. I know the athlete at that point. So let's say Mark Ingram, running back, plays for Baltimore now, but we would have met the night before for 30 minutes. So, and we would go through different keys. So neutral based keys, like for us to be successful, what do we need from you? I need to be aggressive. I need to keep my pad level low. I need to block. I need to do these things. So, hey, and then so sometimes during that, like, hey, Mark, keep your pad level low. All right. Hey, it doesn't matter what the score is. Stay aggressive. Just keep driving. Hey, are you affecting enough people? Look at the lineman over there. This is an opportunity for you to keep them up, right? There's still 26 minutes left in this game. Let's go. And at different moments like that, different basic things where it's coaching, but it's coaching the things that I'm there to coach. I never played football beyond middle school. Now I'm an athlete. I was a good athlete. And then in other moments, I've been in, massive moments before the final drive on a national championship and looking at that guy and, hey, you're built for this. You know exactly what you need to do. Simple, one play at a time, go through your progressions. They're looking you in the eye. You're looking in the eye. The head coach expects you there. He's already done his talk. You're doing the different type of thing. And then there's 1 minute and 21 seconds. 2013, you're down 4 points. It's the Rose Bowl, but you've earned that relationship with that player. And so you're taking that minute and you're having that conversation. And then obviously kickers, right? Kickers are tons of times I've been in that. Kickers are the weirdest guys. Sometimes you can talk to them. Sometimes you can't. We always do something the night before, but I've been in moments with the best kicker in the history of the NCAA, Roberto Aguayo. We would talk before every kick, and every big moment we would go through up the conveyor belt, head down, drive the ball, simple, toe locked, and just basic things that he'd do. And then I'd say, hey, no, go through that. Tell me what? Toe locked, my toe locked, toe locked. What else? Up the conveyor belt. Hey, do we want to be in this situation? I want to be here. And then I might come to our kicker and it's 3rd and 6, and I know he's nervous. And I might walk up to him and say, I hope we lose 15 yards so you get hit a 53-yarder on these dudes' asses. And then get them, and have fun kind of like that. When I know he might be thinking, I hope to God we get 7 yards and I don't have to do anything, right? And then so you're building that relationship. And then thanks to Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher, I was given the platform to do that and to learn how to do that and make mistakes and say the wrong thing and talk to guys in the locker room when I shouldn't have. Now, I went in the NBA with the Memphis Grizzlies. They didn't give me that flexibility to learn. They're like, well, you can't go in the locker room, can't go here. Hey man, if you let me do what I need to do, I will help you. I may not help Marc Gasol, right? I may not help Marc Gasol, but I'll help Vince Carter and I'll help Mike Conley, right? So don't worry about Marc Gasol. Marc Gasol might say, well, only players should be in the locker room. Don't worry about that. Let me do what I need to do. A lot of organizations have trusted me for that, and then the other ones that haven't, that haven't lasted very long.
That's funny. All right. Well, I wrote down here as a reminder, the best vision board you could ever create is the one in your mind.
Yep.
Your dad taught me that. You're teaching that. Listen, what you focus on and the action you're willing to take in between is really powerful. But that language, you talk about limiting the negative language. As I read Russell Wilson in the beginning and throughout the book, he has some positive language in there too.
Oh, he's got tons of it, and it works for him because he doesn't do the negative.
Did you, when you first started training Russell Wilson, I think you said in the book, and he had all the talent in the world when I first met him, but he came to me because he wanted to elevate
the mental aspect.
The mental aspect, yeah.
Yeah, he felt like he needed it as a distinguisher because of his height.
That's right.
And he loved it, and he was passionate about it, and he knew I'd worked with Drew Brees for the draft. So And Russell's a true anomaly. And
what was that? So I don't know if you can say this on the podcast, but get two things about Russell Wilson in those early days.
Yeah.
What were those conversations first like?
I think a lot of it was, we spent a lot of time talking about other athletes that he looked up to and respected, what their processes were and how they went about things. And so he was learning at that point. And we would talk how this connects, or we would go through, I might cut up 9 minutes of Derek Jeter and I might show him that. And I'll say, how does this relate to you?
Yeah, right.
And then where can you do more of this? How does this relate to your locker room? How does it relate to your personal? And so it was a lot of education.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, when he first came down, he would be with his first wife, and they would sit in together. And he would do 2 or 3 extra sessions a week in addition to the group mental conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And it just resonated with him. You got to remember now, from what I know in the NFL of our 2,100 players, there's maybe only 5 or 6 players actively doing what Russell is doing. So you're looking at, 0.05% of athletes that are actively seeking sports psychology help.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Now, some of them have physical trainers, places they go. Yoga's, built some residency stretching. But for the most part, nobody has any education that you can even do this.
I remember Herschel Walker, right? He started to do ballet at one point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to work on the physical side. But what you bring to the table is so much more. And what you're saying is that is a differentiator when it comes to high performance, when it comes to results.
It can. And I think the business world has been the mature, and they've been really ahead of this. I think sports is behind. I think some of that's based upon limited windows of time and other elements. But if you're a coach and you've been raised a certain way, you come through your architecture, you teach what you know. So, my dad would always talk about Ray Kroc and that statement, when you're green, you grow, and when you ripe, you rot. And that you could be green and growing at 68 like Pete Carroll, and ripe and rotting at 27 like Cliff Kingsbury if he's not open to doing these things. What I hope the book does, even though I think the industry in sports is not very good, but what I hope the book does is opens up opportunities for coaches to say, man, I didn't know Nick Saban did that. I didn't know Jimbo Fisher did it. I didn't know that Naval Special Warfare was doing that. And start to think like, we need to look into doing this.
Oh, that's great. Wow,
and then hopefully people in my industry will carry their weight, and not go up there and try to be a yoga coach on day one and teach breathing, but do a good job. And that's what I want to do is blaze that path. And hopefully this book will do it. But I also want people to read the book and get enough information where if they never met me or never took a class or never met someone, they help themselves.
Yeah. And that, I guarantee that will happen for thousands and thousands of people. My son said to me the other day, he said, my married son, Bryce,
handsome. You got a handsome looking family, man. You guys look like a J. Crew family.
No. If I could just keep my weight down, right? Anyway, he said the other day, Dad, do you think I would have been as good as I was during high school sports had I not been raised in your home?
Yeah.
And I said, maybe not. I said, because he was only 5'8".
Yep.
But even today, 5 years later, he still holds 2 Washington State 11-man records. He holds the most yards in a season, 10 games in a season, and the most yards in a game, 573 yards.
Wow.
So he still holds
it.
And he always wanted to play college ball but with concussions and stuff. We had to kind of make a turn on that. And he was scouted by some colleges and so forth. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, because of this teaching, because of these concepts, mm-hmm. yes, you were able to take a 5'8" structure and dominate.
Yep.
And that's the same thing to be said with Russell Wilson, right?
5'10".
Yep. 5'10", but he's out there dominating. And a lot of that has to do with the coaching that you do, and you have become.
And his family did. And he was raised in a great family. And his dad did an incredible job. And then he sought more, which is a testament to him that you don't need to be sick to get better.
Yeah.
And I think your kids understand that as well. Problems shouldn't be your impetus for improving.
Love it.
You know, so hopefully the people that are listening to this are going to seek more, buy more, consume more, and continue on that quest to evolve.
Right. Yeah, you don't need to be sick to get better. Just desire to improve. The biggest room in the world is the room for improvement. Go get it. And like you said early on, you don't have to, but hey, why not?
Why not?
Why not? Why not?
Why not? Exactly. I agree.
All right, let's wind down. We'll make sure we get this out. It'll go out to many, many people. I wish your book a whole lot of success, everyone.
Me too.
Oh, yeah, it will. Hey, watching this podcast, make sure that you get this copy of this book. It takes what it takes. It's a powerful book with powerful principles that have stood the test of time, and you have honed those principles in a unique way that are guaranteed to get results. Thank you for being on the show, Trevor.
You bet. My pleasure. Thank you, TJ.
Awesome.